right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's EG. I'm with Infura, working on the project that's now called DIN. Back in the day, it used to be called Decentralized Infura. So I'll start with explaining a bit about what we meant by decentralizing Infura. DIN actually stands for Decentralized Infrastructure Network, and it's the evolution of what started as our Infura software as a service product. So when we first launched Infura in 2016, it was free. It was a way to easily access Ethereum blockchain data. And over time, we ended up releasing it as a traditional SaaS product. So you had a credit card subscription, you put in all of your typical payment data, and it's just a Web2 SaaS model for consuming blockchain data. Over the last 8 years, the technology has improved in the way that you can actually consume blockchain services, and we started thinking about how the model that we had for offering our product needed to change. And when you look at some other technologies, like here, the example is how we used to pay for text messages. Text messages used to be priced in like cents per message. We used to have specific limits of how much you would use in a given month or period. And then over time, that model evolved into just being rolled up into a larger plan. And now we don't really think about how many messages we're consuming or how many minutes we're using. That model is also changing and has been changing for a while with blockchain RPC. And so as Infura has started, or when Infura started adding additional new networks and services, we grew beyond just serving the Ethereum developer community to serve the developer communities of everybody building on EVM networks, and it became pretty challenging for our team to keep up with all of the new networks that were added. First, we added Polygon as the first network outside of Ethereum that we were supporting, and then Optimism and Arbitrum, and then all of a sudden we were seeing the future being a multi-chain world. Speaking to here today at AltLayer exists now to serve the demand of the multi-chain future. And we were running into a problem very quickly of how can we keep up with that demand. We were seeing that our performance would potentially degrade if we really rushed to add new services and networks, or costs would skyrocket because we were trying to add them very quickly because somebody needed it in 2 weeks, not 2 months, or it was just too much of a burden on our team. And so our team coined this phrase, the RPC trilemma, because similar to the blockchain trilemma, there seemed to always be these trade-offs that our team would have to make in terms of when we were adding a new network, what were we willing to compromise on at that particular point in time, and it wasn't always the same choice. And so we started to think about like what's the best way for us to solve that problem of adding new networks and serving the developer need, and it started to turn into a decentralizing Infura type of idea. We were initially kind of looking at it as a decentralized RPC type of protocol. And some of those things already existed, but it wasn't exactly fitting our goal of like what we felt like would actually solve this problem. What actually solves this problem is building a permissionless marketplace that's not even just specific to RPC. Someplace where if there's a service or some type of data that you need to build the application that you're trying to build for your particular users on Web3, you know that you can go to this protocol and find the services that you need and pay for it in like a seamless way. So we started to think about it as a permissionless marketplace and not just focused on RPC. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. All right, thanks. So there's different layers of how you would interact with this permissionless marketplace. So dApps and developers are the users that have to at some point get connected to the data that they need. The data that they need are provided by node providers or infrastructure providers, and they sit down there inside of this marketplace. And to be able to pay on-chain, it means you have to interact with them by paying in tokens. That tends to be a very high friction type of thing. You've seen a lot of talks over this week so far and today about how people are trying to improve the UX of paying with tokens. Things like account abstraction and embedded wallets and all of the things that are like closer to the UX help solve that problem. The way that people currently interact with gateways that provide services to infrastructure is through fiat. Like Infura is a gateway that provides access to blockchain, and it's through credit card subscriptions, and then we pay our backend providers in fiat for access to, say, Amazon Web Service, compute, or other data center costs and things like that. So what happens if we tokenize that backend of how things get paid? The user at some point has to pay for that unless somebody's subsidizing that cost. These gateways that sit in the middle end up being a translation layer between somebody paying in something that's user-friendly and something that is actually automatable and on-chain, which is tokenized payments. All right. So right now, we're considering this current phase a federated phase of this network. What that means is it's not permissionless. It meant that we had to kind of source the providers that are currently offering node infrastructure services for the network. And once they were onboarded, we would work with them to add particular networks that are now available on DIN to serve Infura developers. This distribution network has grown since we first added Blast in February of this year at ETH Denver. That was the first network that we added. And it's already serving billions of requests per month. What is going on with this clicker? So these gateways are the things that will look like and act like the traditional user interface that developers are using to interact with the DIN marketplace. That's where you put in your payment information. That's where you get your invoices. That's how you get all of your API keys and authentication credentials and things like that. And that is going to connect people to whatever services are available on this marketplace, starting with RPC and then eventually being other types of Web3 data services. The three components that I'm going to go over are the gateways, the node providers, and the watchers. So we've already kind of gone over the gateways. The node providers, as I mentioned, are people that are running infrastructure to serve RPC and could be serving other types of services, like if there's some sort of MEV component that's issued by Flashbots or some other entity like that. It's a service that would be offered on this marketplace. How do you know if that service is actually valid, healthy, and online? There's an aspect of the DIN network called a watcher. That's that third entity that's available on the network that provides these services of checking the health of registered services, issuing performance data so that the gateways and node providers can kind of use each other's services or understand what the health of a given service is at a particular point in time. With a service like Infura right now, our team is the one that kind of serves all of that. And we're going to be kind of decentralizing or breaking apart that into three different aspects on this network. These are the current networks that we've been working with to make them available already on DIN. So if you're interacting with some of these networks through Infura, if you're an Infura developer, your traffic might already be served by one of the providers that's connected through this marketplace. Right now, as I said, we're in this federated phase, which means that to be able to actually be a provider serving traffic for this, it meant you had to be in communications with our team. We're working on making that permissionless, and soon we'll be making an announcement about what that next phase looks like. When we look at the customers of this, we see ourselves as Infura as the first customer. And within Consensus, MetaMask is another big customer. We both benefit from developers and users having access to new networks as soon as they're available or as soon as they're launched. And say if you're launching a new rollup on top of AltLayer, at some point you need to grow beyond the initial deployment that you would have. And how do you scale RPC for some new application that's using your new rollup that you just deployed? Typically, those teams reach out to us at Infura or other centralized providers and ask us to support this new network. DIN allows this to become a marketplace where the node providers and infrastructure providers can interact directly with the demand coming from you as developers building a new rollup. So you can look at the marketplace as how you could meet the demand of your growing user base. So Infura is using DIN as the marketplace for how we add new networks. If you've seen some of the new networks Infura has added over the last 6 months, those are now being added through this marketplace. ZK Sync is one example of one that we launched a few months ago, where the infrastructure that's now running our ZK Sync infrastructure is not run by the consensus team that is the Infura team. It's run by many of our providers that are serving ZK Sync on top of DIN. So this is where we're at today. We're using the current consensus suite of products as our case study of like, how is this working? Are the incentives that we're kind of tinkering around with, tweaking the parameters of working? Ideally, we would have this all like tokenized and on-chain and in some like smart contract, but by having it sort of off-chain, it allows us to quickly iterate on this and make sure that we're not kind of locking in something that's very difficult to move away from in the future. It allows us to serve our existing developer demand, solve a problem for Infura, and get it right once we actually decide to implement this and get it on-chain. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in this federated phase, people are joining DIN by meeting a specific set of acceptance criteria. Our team runs tests to ensure that any new provider that's joining the marketplace is meeting a specific service level quality and level of availability, and also a compatibility with the set of RPC methods or capabilities that people expect when they're interacting with an RPC node. And then how we decide to route traffic, split traffic, and scale is dependent on that particular chain. And our team is the one that's doing that work. And that's something that in the next phase that'll be permissionless, the network will handle instead of us being the ones managing that. It's that progressive decentralization incremental approach to slowly offloading that work from a single entity. But that's where we're going. We're going to move from Infura being this initial gateway, the one that's kind of like a bit too hands-on in like what we need to do in these early phases of having this marketplace, to having multiple gateways that people can interact with. The gateways can kind of be independently configured so that maybe one gateway is optimized for one particular use case, maybe like IoT-oriented or gaming-oriented or end-user wallet-oriented, and then others can choose to offer like higher-level APIs and not just RPC. A lot of people think about gateways right now as just Infura types of entities that are offering access to networks. But there are many types of APIs that people use to build dApps and Web3 applications these days, and it goes beyond just like the basic low-level RPC. And then lastly, having a foundation entity like we saw the announcement of the Linea Association makes sense when you're building a protocol like this to eventually go to that step of having some long-lived entity that can steward the protocol and continue the development of the open source tooling and components. So here's that zoomed out view with the current state and how we're planning on transitioning to our permissionless state after this federated version. Next slide, please. So that's what we're doing right now. In that federated phase, we have a dozen networks already onboarded on this marketplace. We have dozens of providers that are already serving this. If you're building a rollup or planning on releasing a rollup, you can expect DIN to be able to help make this job easier of how you get past that initial launch state and be able to serve the demand of your applications as you need to scale without having to do a lot of that like manual BD and partnership type of work that was the way that we used to do this when we would add new layer 1s and layer 2s. So that's Din. Thanks, everybody.